Juan Carlos had a different vision. Some people think maybe they couldn't get a contract together.
Maybe contract, maybe some other stuff.
The tennis world is still reeling. Phones lit up. Timelines exploded. Fans couldn't believe what they were reading. Carlos Alcaraz, the world number one, had just posted a farewell message to the coach who built him from a 15-year-old rough diamond into a 6 Grand Slam champion. Just weeks before the Australian Open. No warning, no press conference, just a social media post, and then silence.
So Carlos Alcaraz just split up with his longtime coach Juan Carlos Ferrero after having had a phenomenal year with 2 Grand Slam titles and finishing the year as #1 in the world.
The takes came fast. Pat Cash, a tennis expert who pulls no punches, called it a head-scratcher and said it could be Alcaraz's biggest career mistake. Tony Nadal said the reasons go beyond tennis. Rick Maxey said it was simply his decision to make. Fans who had worshipped Alcaraz for years suddenly withdrew their unconditional admiration. Spanish tennis Twitter fractured overnight. And underneath all of it, one question nobody could answer. Why would the best player on the planet fire his coaches at the absolute peak of their shared success, not after a bad season, not after a final loss? After a career-best 71-match wins, after 2 Grand Slams in a single year, now someone has finally stepped forward to explain exactly what went wrong. The contract sat on Ferrero's desk for 48 hours. He didn't sign it. Subscribe if you're new, because what happened next changes everything you think you know about this story. So let's go back to that contract. December 13th, 2025, a Saturday morning. Juan Carlos Ferrero is at his academy in Villena, the same building where he helped turn a skinny kid from El Palmar into the most complete tennis player on the planet. He opens the document, he reads the clauses, and according to a source close to his camp, what he finds isn't just a salary negotiation, it's a set of non-sporting conditions, terms about the professional direction of Carlos Alcaraz's career, terms that, in Ferrero's own words, he considered unacceptable. He has until Monday morning to respond. 48 hours, for 7 years of service, for 6 Grand Slams. For the 2025 ATP Coach of the Year award, which almost impossibly had been handed to him just 6 days earlier. He doesn't sign, and by Wednesday, December 17th, the post goes up. Here's what makes that timeline so brutal. Ferrero had already mapped out the entire 2026 preseason. The Australian Open schedule was planned, training blocks were set. In his mind, the partnership was continuing. He told Marca directly, "When Carlos played the final in Turin in November, it seemed certain we would continue. Everything was pointing forward. Then the contract arrived, 2 weeks after it should have, with a 48-hour clock attached. No negotiation, no conversation, just sign or don't." He didn't. Now, some people in the tennis world immediately jumped to the simplest explanation: money, a salary dispute, the kind of thing that ends business relationships every day. But Ferrero himself shut that down publicly. The financial gap, he said, was not the decisive issue. His first coach, Carlos Santos, called it a financial disagreement too, but even Santos admitted he was working from the outside. What Ferrero kept pointing to were those non-sporting clauses, the professional direction question, and that phrase keeps coming back because it's the thread that connects every other piece of this story. So what is the professional direction of Carlos Alcaraz's career actually pointing toward? Look at the numbers off the court. In 2025, Alcaraz ranked 35th on Sportico's list of the 100 highest-paid athletes in the world, with an estimated $57.8 million in total earnings. $36 million of that came from off-court sources: Nike, Rolex, BMW, Babolat. Appearance fees, exhibitions that took him across continents in the middle of training blocks. Ferrero's position on all of this was never hidden. He had told Spanish media outlet Clay directly, a player needs to understand when to really work, when to rest, when to be focused. He used the word professionalism. He used it more than once, and the Netflix documentary My Way, released earlier in 2025, showed exactly where the fault line was forming. Viewers watched Alcaraz talk openly about enjoyment as his priority, about freedom, about living his version of the tennis life. Ferrero, sitting across from all of that, was a man of what one journalist described as Scandinavian sobriety. The contrast wasn't subtle. Former Brazilian player Fernando Meligeni, a close friend of Ferrero's from their days on tour together, gave perhaps the most honest read of the situation. He said the "my way" philosophy meant more than a taste for nightlife. It's the schedule, it's how much, it's how. The problem is about commitment, how much you're going to commit. And then he added something that cuts to the heart of the whole thing. How much is the family going to be involved? Alcaraz's family is all in. That word, family, is where this story gets complicated. Carlos Alcaraz's father, Carlos Alcaraz, Sr. has been running the Carlos Alcaraz Tennis Academy in El Palmar for over 30 years. It's the player's home, it's where he grew up hitting balls. And in recent months before the split, Alcaraz had become increasingly reluctant to make the one-hour drive to train at Ferrero's Equilite Academy in Villena. The father was actively promoting the El Palmar facility, building it, investing in it, and according to multiple sources close to the situation, the disagreements between Ferrero and Alcaraz Sr. about how to manage the career had been building for a long time. Clay reported that a heated argument between them had erupted as far back as February 2023, when Ferrero announced he wouldn't travel on the South American tour. Alcaraz's father reportedly didn't take it well. Ferrero was careful in his Marca interview. He never named Alcaraz Sr. directly, but the direction of his comments left little ambiguity. He confirmed he spoke to Carlos, the player, before everything was finalized. Asked him whether he was aware of the terms on the table. Alcaraz said yes. From that point, Ferrero said, he dealt with the people he needed to deal with, not the player, the entourage. Tony Nadal, who spent decades as Rafael Nadal's coach and understands this dynamic better than almost anyone alive, drew a clear parallel. He said that when a coach starts working with a player as a child, the power structure is simple. The coach leads, the player follows. But as the player grows, as the money grows, as the fame grows, the balance shifts. It seems to me like it was Alcaraz who made the decision, Tony said, because Ferrero made a statement saying he had wanted to continue. But he was also careful to say it wasn't Carlos driving it alone. I think the reason is not about tennis. And that is exactly the point the tennis expert at the center of this debate is finally explaining. This wasn't a coaching decision, it was a power decision, a control decision. The question being answered inside that 48-hour ultimatum wasn't, is Ferrero a good coach? Everyone already knew the answer to that. The question being answered was, who runs Carlos Alcaraz? Pat Cash didn't dance around it. He told Tennis 365 what a lot of longtime followers of the sport were thinking but not saying out loud. We are seeing a lot of managers and agents who get into a player's ear, think they know the best for the player, and throw a seed of doubt in there. It can really destroy a relationship. He called the whole thing a head-scratcher, because from a purely sporting standpoint, it made no sense. Ferrero had just delivered Alcaraz's best season. 2 Grand Slams in 2025, a return to world number 1, a career-best 71 match wins. You don't fire the architect of that, not unless the reasons have nothing to do with what's happening on the court. And here is where the biggest mistake argument gets its sharpest edge. Ferrero wasn't just a coach. Every person close to this situation, even the ones defending Alcaraz's camp, acknowledged that. Carlos Santos, who coached Alcaraz as a child, said the player had absorbed everything Juan Carlos taught him. He compared it to reading a book and knowing it by heart. But Santos also revealed something significant. He didn't believe Samuel Lopez would remain head coach for the full season. He said directly, "I'm certain that Samuel won't be the head coach for the entire season. Definitely. There's something in the works already." Meaning the plan was already forming before Ferrero had even cleared out. The decision to remove him wasn't reactive. It was structured, calculated. Now, who is Samuel Lopez and why does he matter? Lopez is not a famous name outside the inner circles of Spanish tennis, but his record is serious. He coached Nicolas Almagro to world number 9 in 2011, in an era when the top of the rankings was occupied almost entirely by Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, Murray, and Soderling. He then coached Pablo Carreño Busto to world number 10 in 2017. Two different players, two separate careers. Both reached the top 10, and Ferrero himself had trusted Lopez enough to bring him into the Alcaraz team as his number 2 at the end of 2024. Lopez had already been head coach for Alcaraz at the 2024 Australian Open when Ferrero was recovering from knee surgery. The transition, in practical terms, wasn't starting from zero, but a number 2 operating under Ferrero's vision is a fundamentally different thing from a number 2 suddenly responsible for guiding the most scrutinized player in men's tennis. Lopez stepped into that without a preseason, without a formal announcement, and with the entire tennis world watching to see if the wheels came off. They didn't, at least not immediately. Alcaraz arrived in Melbourne for the 2026 Australian Open and reached the semi-finals without dropping a single set. Then he played Alexander Zverev, and it got brutal. He won the first 2 sets, then cramps hit. He dropped the third in a tiebreak, then the fourth in a tiebreak. 5 hours and 27 minutes, the longest Australian Open semi-final in tournament history. He won the 5th set, and then, in the final, he absorbed a dominant first set from Djokovic before resetting, tactically, mentally, physically, to win 2-6, 6-2, 6-3, 7-5. Career Grand Slam, youngest in history, at 22 years and 272 days old. Boris Becker said it plainly afterward. It was a difficult decision for Team Alcaraz to part ways with the successful duo, but after 14 days, we know that the decision was the right one. And that's where the counter-argument lives. The results are real, the history is real. Alcaraz then won the Qatar Open 20 days later, demolishing Arthur Fils 6-2, 6-1 in 50 minutes. 12 consecutive wins to start 2026, his best ever beginning to a season. But here's the thing, the celebration tends to skip over. Ferrero wasn't removed because he was failing. He was removed at the top, and why? That matters. Why the tennis expert is still treating his decision to fire his coaches as a mistake, even after the Australian Open trophy, isn't about what happened in January 2026. It's about what happens across the next 10 years of a career that could become the greatest men's tennis has ever seen. Ferrero understood something about Alcaraz that the scoreboard can't measure. He understood the cost of the off-court machine, the exhibitions that cross oceans during training blocks, the corporate appearances, the academy politics pulling the player's time and focus in directions that feel manageable at 22, but compound with age and accumulated pressure. Ferrero's Scandinavian sobriety, that phrase again, was never about being joyless. It was about protecting the asset, protecting the window of dominance that closes faster than any player ever believes it will. Nadal had Tony, Djokovic had Vida for the formative years, Federer had Lundgren, then Annacona, then Luthi. Every generational player eventually parts with the coach who built them. That's not the argument. The argument is the timing, the manner, the 48-hour ultimatum, the structured exit that was clearly in motion before Ferrero even saw the contract. That's not a player evolving. That's a machine deciding it no longer needs the engineer, and that assumption, at 22, with everything still ahead, carries real risk. Alcaraz himself stood in Melbourne and said, "Nobody knows how hard I have been working to get this trophy." He was right, and he won it. But Ferrero knew exactly how hard the work had been, because he had designed it. Every tactical layer, every physical preparation block, every mental framework for closing out a Grand Slam final. That knowledge doesn't transfer through a social media post and a 48-hour contract window. The Spanish fans who turned their backs on Alcaraz in December 2025 weren't just being sentimental, they were reading something real. A relationship that had been described in Alcaraz's own words as that of a second father. Ended not through conversation, not through a mutual winding down, but through a document sent on a Saturday with a Monday deadline attached. Ferrero said he was hurting. He said it plainly. He also said he believed Alcaraz had the potential to become the greatest tennis player in history. Those two things can both be true, and the fact that they are both true at the same time, that the man best positioned to help him reach that ceiling is now watching from the outside, is exactly why the cost of his biggest mistake hasn't fully arrived yet. The scoreboard looks clean right now, but the clock is running. If this kind of deep dive is what you come here for, subscribe and hit the bell because we're just getting started.